There's a few in now, so we'll make a start. So firstly, if anyone from VII is on, thank you for this opportunity. I don't know anyone in this group, so we're allocated half an hour. I can't see us taking that long, so you'll get a bit of your life back. But very briefly, if I give you guys a few minutes on EventDecision and the Track suite of products and how they can help you. I'm assuming you're involved in events. That's why you're here. I don't know what roles any of you guys actually have. So I'll give a very broad overview of how you might benefit from some of this. EventDecision is a results company and a measurement company. We measure a number of things around events, but we're here today to talk briefly about Track and how you can actually define and measure the sustainability of an event as a kind of discrete item. Obviously, you can look at these across programs and across quarters and years if you wish. But most of the questions that we get at this stage of engagement with people are around how on earth do you define what a sustainable event is and how do you measure it? The short answer is, and I have got a ton of slides. I'll probably only share one or two just to show you a couple of diagrams. But from your perspective, if you're involved in planning or looking at the sustainability of an event that you are hosting or organizing on behalf of a client or an agency, have the ability now to say to your client or your boss or your organizer, your host, that the total number of emissions created by your event as an item is, let's call it, X numbers of tons of CO2. So what we do is present you with a real hard, cold number. You don't get a gold badge. You don't get a stripe to put on your arm or anything like that. It's a commercial tool to look at your event and say, actually, the number of tons that your event is creating is 102 or 1,040, whatever that number is. And we create that number by using a nice analogy is Lego, if everyone's familiar with that. It's measuring lots and lots of individual Lego bricks. We can measure up to 41, random number, of variables that you have when you're building your event. So that's everything from transportation to the venue itself, food and beverage, accommodation, delegate travel is always a big one in a number of different ways, short, medium and long haul flights, coaches, trains, private cars and so forth. And we are able to measure all of those with data that exists already in a huge global database called EcoInvent 3.6 to get really dull, and add those, measure them all and add them up and present you with two working diagrams. And this is the point that I will just share you what we're going to, what you will see. Hopefully that will come up now. I can't see you guys now, so I'm just talking to my own screen. Mm-hmm. But what we do is create a track report. And this is an example of a track report. It's nice and short. It's nice and easy to understand. And there are really only two diagrams that you will find useful when you're reporting how sustainable your event is. And these are they. The one towards the upper side of the screen gives you your total tonnage. And that's broken down. We take the 41 measurements and move it into 7 that are more understandable and based around the budgetary items that you would have within your event. So the example that you're looking at there has a really high accommodation quotient for that particular event. They don't always look like this. Often travel is a larger proportion. But it gives you a really good example of the total impact of your event in tons of CO2. And how that's broken down by the format, nature, and location and destination of your event. So it's nice and easy to understand. And actually, if you wanted to work to mitigate the impact of that particular event, there's no prizes for giving which segment you would look at first. That would clearly be the accommodation piece. And the second interesting diagram that we have here is, again, simple to understand. We will plot where your event falls in relation to others on the lower diagram there. So clearly the green has a lower impact in sustainable terms, and the red are much higher. And we show you that by tons of CO2e. The E just means we're allowed to include lots of other nasty gases and emissions per delegate. And where that's useful is if you're organizing an online event like this one, for example, and you're not in the green, either we've measured it wrong, or there are potentially better ways to put the event together. Conversely, if you've got in-person elements, or it's a global get-together for a week with an awful lot of long-haul flights, it will be in the orange or red sectors. And that will show you, in those two diagrams together, will show you where the major impact of your event actually is, and where you might look to try and mitigate the impact of your event. So in really basic terms, there's lots of ways in which we will show you how to bring particular elements down. None of those will potentially be rocket science to us event professionals. If you've got a huge travel element, obviously there are ways, we're using one right now, to reduce that. Similarly for food and beverage, you can play with the menus to reduce the impact of those in terms of local sourcing, removing meat from the menus, all those lovely hints and tricks that people will give you and that you know. The answer is yes, this session is recorded to that question. So although sustainability is a really complex subject, events are known for not being particularly sustainable activities. We now have the ability, and this is unmatched, we've not seen it anywhere else globally as yet, to actually quantify that and to report that to those people that need to know. If you are a client and you're hosting your own events, you can report it into your organization's ESG channel and say, for the first time, I'll come to that question in a second about the food, the first time to actually give a full amount in tons, rather than this qualifies as a gold event. Every single metric we use across those 41 different Lego bricks, if you like, is accredited to the IPCC. So the maths, the metrics that we use to put the tonnage together is an accredited process. People often use this within their pitch, within their RFP or their proposal stage, to say to a client or an event owner, this is us, we're really great, and all those lovely things that salespeople put in there. Here is our solution to your proposal, your pitch, and this is the impact of it. And you can then work through the event process to try and bring that down. Because, the next section of all this, many clients make very grand claims about carbon neutrality at an organizational level. We see them all the time from big global brands that by 2022, by 2025, 2035, whatever their particular want is, that they are or will be carbon neutral. But the only way to achieve that is to actually measure what it is that you're creating. So we now, for the first time, the in-house event teams, the agencies, the venues, even the platforms like VII that we're on now, have the ability to quantify that number and to feed that number into their own company's ESG channel to actually account for the activity that we do in the events world. To achieve carbon neutrality, it is becoming, and it's not a global standard yet, but it is becoming best practice, shall we say, to mitigate, to reduce the impact of the event as much as possible, and then to offset the rest. Now, offset is a completely different topic. Some people are very much in favor of it, some people less so. We can, once we have an established number, offset that for you, or you will find if you're organizing on behalf of a client, that they may very well have their own offset channel. So they'll have their own ways of planting trees or funding renewable energy and so forth. There's quite a lot of flexibility around that. But if you want your event to be net carbon neutral, and the key word here is net, which means you have genuinely try to reduce the impact in environmental terms of your event, we can also do that. As an aside, we don't make any money off the offset because we don't believe that that is particularly ethical. The companies who deliver those projects, and they're the ones we use, are all accredited and certified by Gold Standards and Plan Vivo and all the various certifications that there are in that world. But our main job is to quantify and give you an indication, a really good idea of what the total impact of your event is, and therefore which parts you should look at to try and bring that down. It's up to the event owner, the budget owner, to decide if they want to try and offset that amount. And that's real money. Those are, real dollars that go into planting trees. And it can be a big number. It can be in the tens of thousands of pounds, euros, and dollars. It can be a big number. Hence, clients are usually very, very keen to try and reduce that number as much as possible. So that's a really quick overview. There's a couple of questions. Food-wise, Louise, we measure it by meals. We have the data that shows the impact of vegetarian and non-vegetarian meals at country level. So those are the main two ways that we will classify. You'll find if we measure an event for you and you move one meal from non-vegetarian to vegetarian, that can have a noticeable impact. Depends on the size of the event. The main categories, and this will become as no surprise to any of you, I'm sure, the main categories that tend to are the most sensitive and tend to usually make up the majority of an event's footprint are travel, accommodation, and food and beverage. So those are the three main categories that you want to look at when you're planning a proposal or in the middle of planning an event to see if you can mitigate those. Delegate travel can be up to 90%. Some of these, global banking software company we measured the other day, north of 90% was delegate travel, because a significant proportion are flying into Europe from the States or from Asia Pacific. We have seen events that have made good or significant changes to the format of the event because of the footprint. So we saw a global telecoms that was going to fly, or were, 75 odd people from Australia and New Zealand into Frankfurt. And on the back of footprint information, they only brought 5 and the remainder joined online. Those sorts of choices are those that the agencies and the planners can make on the back of this information. It's not necessarily a massive surprise that reducing long haul travel is better for your event footprint than perhaps moving one meal from non-vegetarian to vegetarian, or reducing the amount of bed nights that you're using and asking the locals perhaps not to stay over. These are decisions, hence the name Event Decision, that you guys can make whether you're a client or an agency on behalf of what the event is trying to achieve. And it may be we're still allowed to deliver great events, and events often involve travel. But what we do is give you the ability to actually quantify that, to compare different destinations. If you want to hold an event in the States, an event in Europe, an event in Asia Pacific, as opposed to having one large event in mainland Europe somewhere, which is often the way for some of the things we measure, we can show what difference that has in footprint. There is, of course, a budgetary implication by hosting three different events to one major, but it may not be massive if they want to have a carbon neutral label attached to that event, because of you're not paying for huge amounts of carbon offset. So that's really it as an overview. We could dive into the weeds on what we count and what we don't count. We call those boundaries, and they're often the source of a lot of discussion. Should we include this element? Should we include that element? We're always open to discussions around different formats of events. Clearly, in person tend to have higher footprints than virtual or hybrid, and then virtual, like this one, tend to be low. They're still measurable. So we could measure once we know that the numbers of people that are logged on to A2Z today, we could provide a report to Stas and the guys at VII and say, the energy that we, the few thousand of people that probably logged on, are consuming right now as I'm watching you, plus the energy that the host servers and so forth, and usually a studio somewhere, are consuming. That is still, still measurable, still there, still has a potential impact. Tamsin, to answer your question, yes, we can segment out parts of the different event to say, if a venue wants to know their impact for a particular part, or a virtual provider wants to know their part of a particular, then yes, absolutely. We can take out segments of the orange, if you like, and say, yours is this part, yours is that part. It's a new product. We've been going actually for 11 months now. It's going really well. It's proving very popular. Agencies, platforms, hotel chains, clients direct. But we are a small company with 5 people, but it is growing because we're having to explain the principles, the premise, and also help agencies support what their clients are trying to do to allow people to understand that this is something that is now possible. 5 years ago, this was not possible. The data wasn't in the right place. It wasn't all consolidated. The company is called EventDecision, all one word, .com. It's a really simple website. You can fill in an online form and send us the information. What we need to calculate is effectively your event brief. So the sectors that we calculate are often very, very similar to the sections of your budget. So we don't need to know every tiny little detail. Let's imagine there's a group of 500 people in Berlin staying overnight for 3 nights, and they've got an off-site dinner. All we need to know is that there is an off-site dinner and they're transferring by coach, and it's about a 20-minute journey. That level of detail, we know the emissions associated with coaches at a country level, because we know they're different in each country, and we know how many people fit on a coach generally. And we know that they'll be doing 2 journeys. And we know that the coaches will probably run, because we're all events people, not techies, they'll probably run from 9:30 p.m. back to the hotels and be doing round trips to accommodate everyone getting back at the time that they want to. And we will put all that into the calculation. So we don't need to know an exact number. We don't need to know the exact number of meals that you're planning. If there's 500 people there, we know that the hotel will slightly over cater. We know that there will be a crew commensurate with the size of the event who will also need feeding. We know that there will be a rehearsal day in all likelihood, that there will be a build day, and there will be lighting techs, sound techs, carpenters, chippies and the likes, all on site, all consuming. They'll be consuming water. They might even consume a beer or 2 at night. And they will need to travel to the destination and back as well. All of those go into the calculation. We try and make it as accurate and as meaningful as possible. Louise, you've asked, do you charge per event, or can agencies have a license for all events? The answer is both. Some people like to buy spot purchase for a particular pitch response. Some people like to buy bundles of 10. Some people like, if they know the volumes of events that are coming from a particular client or brand, we can look at that. We like to try and be flexible. I'd love to say it's an algorithm that does it all. It's not. It's a human at this end, because we're all in events and we know that every event is different. So actually, the numbers of keystrokes from your end, very minimal. It's just in briefing us, whether you want to do that electronically or like this. Often we do 10-minute Zoom calls or Teams calls with clients to understand that actually how many people are going, where they're moving around site, how many hotels, what different star ratings they are. We know you're not going to put your crew in 5 stars, sadly, having been crew for many years. We know that you are going to take a chunk of 4 or 5 stars for your delegates and your B2B guys and girls. So all of that goes in to give you that circular diagram, the pie chart of different sectors of the event, and then the hierarchical, don't really have a name for it actually. In the UK, if you buy a house, your house is automatically rated using that color diagram. But it is, it's a useful tool in the planning, and if your client wants to know what the impact of their event are. It's quite an interesting time for us because you guys as planners have so much to do now. You've got to balance the virtual, you've got augmented reality and virtual reality. There's so much more. There's all the COVID contingency planning and all that stuff as well. So we know this is one of many, many things that you are trying to juggle in the planning process. That's why we make it as easy as possible. You brief us, we do the work, we send you back the report. Very happy to produce timely reports on a monthly basis for particular clients. Often people will measure at the beginning and again at the end to demonstrate and quantify the benefit and the value that you have brought to your client. At the beginning, it was going to be 87 tons. To give you an idea, a ton of carbon to offset costs around 24 pounds probably. So what's that? $28, $30, 28 euros. So if you're in the thousands of tons with a lot of long haul flights, that's a large number. So you can work fairly easily to reduce that number and show your client by measuring at the beginning and at the end and show that difference. Or measure your event for 2022 and challenge your client, challenge the owner of the event to deliver it better in 2023. They are going to have to do this. So the clients and the brands for whom we all deliver are having to, from regulatory perspective, to report on their carbon. And now, even us poor little event folk who've had a very interesting time over the last couple of years, I'm sure we all have, can actually report that in real certified numbers. So that's, you know, I can go on forever. We're 24 minutes in, I think, to our half an hour, and I've seen something saying, go to the escape room. So feel free to escape if you wish. It's EventDecision.com. In terms of timelines, we can normally turn in a report around for the majority of events within 48 hours. So it's not a massively long process. We are invited often to go on site to do an audit actually on the event day. I call it the croissant count. How many people, how much breakfast has actually been consumed. But actually we find that those on-site audits are fairly clear, fairly close to the real ones, to the predictive ones. So there we are. I think everyone is leaving. Any questions? EventDecision.com. It's at the top of the chat. Maybe still got Aid on. And then if there's any questions, just drop me a note. We will get straight on it for you. And there we are. That's Event Decision.